Right. Next, we have Lena Haldenius, who is professor of human rights studies at Lund University, and she was secretary in the late 1990s.
Thank you for coming out, and thank you for inviting me. So I won't reminisce for very long. I will talk about something else. But yes, so like you just heard, I think I was on the Philosophical Society's board in the late 1990s. I was co-organizing the 75th anniversary of the Philosophical Society, which feels a very, very long time ago. But by the standards that we just heard, just a flash has gone by. So I came to the philosophy department in the mid 1990s, and I came to philosophy from law and from the social sciences. So my way into philosophy was different compared to some of my contemporaries. I was also a woman, which as we just, well, I still am, which as we just heard was highly unusual. I don't think when I came that there were any female PhDs, but there were sort of a group of us that in the same generation. And I have always been curious to think about my own reaction afterwards, because it was not at the time. I was often the only woman in the seminar room, or it was me and Jeanette Emt. And I didn't think about that at the time. I've been thinking about it later a lot. And that could mean two things that I didn't think about at the time. Could mean either of two things, or maybe both. It could either be that it didn't matter because I felt welcome and included. It could also be because the absence of women, not only in the room, but also on the curriculum, was so complete that it didn't register. Had we had a couple of female philosophers on our reading lists, maybe the fact that there was a few of them would have made itself felt. But since there were none at all, it just was sort of the way of the world. And I'm glad to know that it's different. I think actually I have some of my books on the reading list. So, final fact of memory lane. The most fun engagement that I think that I had in the philosophy society, other than of course attending all the lectures and seminars that we organized, was that I was the poster maker of the Philosophy Society for many years. And I have to tell you, children, this was before you could Google for copyright-free images. So I spent hours, way too many hours, browsing photography and art books for images for the posters that I had absolutely no right to use. So the whole archive of posters is a catalog of copyright crimes, but don't tell anyone. Okay, so since my PhD, which was in 2001, I have been working exclusively in multidisciplinary settings. So I thought I would talk a bit about that and of being a philosopher, working with philosophy, with the researchers who are not philosophers, and doing projects where I try to philosophize about stuff together with other researchers and using other methods. using empirical methods and interviews. So I will talk a bit about my current research project, but I'm trying to do what I like to call public philosophy. That's not really a thing, but we're trying to make it up as we go along. What I also want to do, what I'm interested in exploring currently, I have no idea if I'm doing this well, is to not only sort of be a philosopher together with researchers who do other things, but also to philosophize together with communities of people who are usually not heard, certainly not at philosophical societies, but whose voices, input, knowledge, and experience, I think, has a valid place in how we think about normative theories and how we think about ideas about justice, which I'm primarily engaged with at the moment, particularly economic justice. So I try to philosophize in society and with communities of people who are not used to having those discussions, and it's difficult, but potentially rewarding. So I would talk a bit about that. So I'm currently doing a project together with a colleague who is originally an art historian, but who now works with digitization and digital cultures and how people relate culturally to the digital world. And our project is about money. It is about cash. And the fact that we are currently going through a change or a transition in how our payment market works. So as you will know, it is increasingly difficult to pay with cash at Swedish stores and cafes and public services and transport. And there was sometimes an idea for a research project can be sparked by a very sort of contingent event. And in my case, it was a early morning. I was on my way to, I live in Malmö. I was on my way to the bus station and I met a woman who I know slightly and sometimes talk to. She's a so-called EU migrant from Romania and spends time occasionally in Sweden trying to get by begging in the street. And she came up to me, she recognized me, she came up to me with a fistful of coins in one hand and her bus pass on the other. You know, that little plastic card that we used to have, the JoJo card. And she had just been to the convenience store where she usually go to top up her bus pass with the money that she get in her cup. And she had been turned away and she didn't understand why. And I knew why, but I couldn't explain it to her because we don't share a language. And what had happened was that the JoJo card had been discontinued and had been replaced by an app. And the convenience stores no longer, you can no longer go to the convenience store to top up anything. And of course, the buses had stopped accepting cash as payment several years before. She lives in a completely cash-based economy. Cash is the only money she's got. She doesn't have a bank account. She doesn't have a smartphone because she can't afford it. She doesn't have the last 4 digits, which you need to have in Sweden in order to get anything. So what I would have had to tell her if we had shared a language was that from now on, you cannot take the bus in Malmö. It's impossible. They have tweaked the system since So now it is possible, it's just very, very difficult. That's the difference. So what does this mean for a person who lives at the very margins of society, who is completely dependent on the goodwill of other people, who has no say in how society transitions and changes, where a decision taken at a board meeting at a transport company means that from now on, she cannot take the bus, even though she has the money to pay for a ticket. Now, that encounter that morning is the reason why we now have this project. So this is a particular kind of complete exclusion from the official economy, which is a consequence of a transition which most of us takes for granted, which is the way of the world. This is how economies or payment markets change all over the globe, really, towards more and more digitization. And Sweden is the country in the world which has progressed, if we want to call it that, further than any other. So cash use in Sweden is lower than anywhere else. There is no legal requirement on stores and services in Sweden to accept cash as payment, even though cash still is legal tender. So this seemed to me, it seemed incumbent upon me as a political philosopher to think about this in terms of economic justice. I mean, the theories of economic justice that I had been taught and that I was used to thinking about concern distributive justice, who has how much of what. And if we're interested in equality, then equality of what? What is the principle for distributing stuff, and what kind of stuff are sort of the object of deliberations over justice? And it's very clear to me that these theories are completely insufficient in terms of understanding what it is like to live within an economy. There are so many experiences, encumbrances, things that happen to people, and also the sense of feeling or being included in how the economy works. It's very obvious, it became very obvious to me that if you live in a cash economy, you are sort of dispensable in terms of how we think about economic development. Now, the digitized payment markets are convenient for probably all of us, at least if we have the Swedish 4-digit codes. And the Swedish self-image is very much also that we are a country of early adopters of new technologies, and we pride ourselves on that too. But still, in 2020, about 20% of the urban population, 37% of the rural population reported that they could not manage without cash. I don't know what could not manage means, but they would face difficulties. And another thing which is also striking when it comes to the digitization of the payment market, which is also something that is often not thought about within theories of economic justice, is where lies the economic power? So the digitization of the payment market is also at the same time a privatization of the payment market. So the only money that the state central bank issues and controls is cash money. So if you get credit, if you get a loan from the bank loans you money for something. In that instance, the money creates that money. The bank creates that money. And when you pay it back, the money is destroyed again. That's how money works. Most of the money that floats around in society is credit money. So it's created by commercial banks, not by the state central bank. So this is a further aspect of economic exclusion. If you're not creditworthy, you can't get that kind of credit money. So digitization shifts the balance on the payment market, the balance of power between the state and by commercial agents. So this is also much more evident in Sweden than in most other countries. So the electronic IDs in Sweden are issued by commercial banks, not by the state, for instance. there is a bit of a discussion going on about this, mostly about the security of the digital systems for payments. That has been sort of get sort of renewed currency now with the war in Ukraine, that we are vulnerable. The digitized payment systems are vulnerable to hostile infiltration. But that is not what we're interested or what we are looking at in this project. We are looking at the exclusion from the digitized payment market on the basis of economic vulnerability and social exclusion. So living cash-dependent lives. Who is that? Who lives cash-dependent lives and why? Well, cash dependence follows the sort of digital divide. Cash dependence is an aspect of digital inequality. So indicators of cash dependence are disabilities, and there is a bit of a discussion about that. Age, there's also a bit of discussion about that. Migration or refugee status, because you don't yet have a bank account and things like that. But the biggest indicator of cash dependence is poverty. So the more poor you are, the more likely it is that you are dependent on the cash economy. And so if you are completely cash dependent, and if stores and services stop accepting cash, you will be effectively locked out of the official economy. And that is what we are investigating and trying to learn from in terms of how we need to understand what economic injustice is. So one of the methods that we use then is that we do interviews. And I say interviews, I said before that we try to sort of talk. It's different to do, I think, interviews if you come from philosophy rather than you come from sort of empirical sciences. I'm not trained in doing interviews. I'm sure that I do it wrong. It's very, very difficult and challenging work. But I'm keen to emphasize that what we get from the people that we interview are not just data. We get knowledge about what it is like and what their experiences are of living cash-dependent lives. And the people that we interview, we have interviewed two sort of cohorts yet. We're still interviewing, so we're not done. We have interviewed volunteers who work in organizations that help refugees, asylum seekers, EU migrants, people with disabilities, homeless cafes, things like that. And we started interviewing people who work within these organizations because we wanted to use them as gatekeepers, and also because we wanted to get sort of a layout. We want to see what kind of recurrent problems are they encountering in the people that they meet. But also, you can't just go up to a homeless person on the street and say, "Can I interview you for this research project?" That would count as a violation of their integrity. So we need to tread very carefully, and that's why we get to these people through organizations and people that they already trust. So we use the volunteers as sort of gatekeepers to get to the people that we're really interested in talking about, which are people who live very much on the margins of society, who are either begging for their keep, selling street magazines, or buying and selling drugs, or buying and selling other things. So some of the sort of implications for economic injustice that we get from this, and of course one question is, what am I doing as a philosopher interviewing these people? But it seems to me, or it feels important to me, that what they are giving me, as I said before, it's not just data, it's their experiences and the things, and the transcribed interviews that we then work with is sort of philosophical texts for me. And I try to use them in that way, and input into what we need to understand in order to think fruitfully about economic justice in our time. Some of the things that we have found, and I will just in a minute, I will read a few vignettes from interviews in order to sort of give you a feel for the kind of things that we hear. Is that questions of economic justice is not only about what you have or what you don't have, it's also a matter of feeling disconnected from the development of society. And one of the things that we realized, because when we went into this, we thought that the biggest problem for these people would be that they will be turned away from stores because they can't pay they come there with their cash to the H&M or to whatever. But it turned out to be not that. There were mainly two problems that I think are interesting to think about in terms of injustice. One is that most of the people that we have interviewed so far, they are so marginalized from the official sort of workings of society that in a sense, the fact that many stores don't accept cash as payment is not really a problem for them because they would never have gone to those stores anyway. So it's like, we like to think of it as if cash has developed within Swedish society into kind of a local currency, which works as payment within certain circles. And if you live a cash dependent life, then you will move in these circles. And as long as you move within those circles, things work. You can buy money, you can buy your clothes in secondhand stores, you can go to the homeless cafe for lunch, but you can't stray outside of that. So we are sort of isolated islands of cash economy, sort of dispersed throughout society. So they're sort of not locked out as much as they are locked in to sort of small circles of cash economy, and they are absolutely excluded from the official economy outside of that. But we'd also think about this in terms of epistemic injustice, a concept that would be familiar to many of you. That the experiences that they have, the problems that they meet, and the knowledge that they have about how you negotiate your life in a society where you don't fit is not regarded very much as valid knowledge. They are not treated as people who have valid experiences and things that they can inform official society about. What they get is that they can be listened to and accepted as long as they talk about their practical problems. But in terms of so providing knowledge that would be relevant for the official society to take into account in terms of how it develops, that just does not happen. So their voices are not counted as relevant knowledge. And that is sort of part of the what I feel is like a moral responsibility for me to make sure that their experiences are not only heard but also treated as valid knowledge. So we have some sort of just examples of spin-off effects that maybe you don't think about. If you we talk to some elderly people who are still able to drive, so they still have a car, but they can't pay for parking because they can't work the payment, the apps for parking. So they get parking tickets and run into debt. And when they run into debt, their economic situation deteriorates. They get very worried, so they stop driving. So they will stop going out in their car, which previously was the an important part of their quality of life because they can't pay for parking. Another example were people who are asylum seekers who can't pay the bus fare. And this was particularly problematic during COVID, because during COVID, you could not enter the bus at the front. Remember, you had to enter at the back. And so you couldn't pay, even if the bus accepted credit card, you couldn't pay with a card. They don't have a card, so it wouldn't have mattered. But anyway, you can only pay with the app because you could only enter from the back. So if you can't pay your bus fare, what do you do? Well, if you can't pay the bus fare, you can't get to your language class. And if you can't get to your language class, you will lose your place there. And if you lose your place there, you will lose your daily allowance. So the fact that you can't pay for a bus ticket means that you will lose your daily allowance. So this has sort of spin-off effects from these very small things. So being cash dependent is not only about not being able to pay for a pair of trousers at H&M, it's sort of a complete disconnect from the digital world. And this is something that we heard a lot about when we talked to informants, that they were not only how the aspect of their cash dependence sort of translates into a wider sense of complete marginalization and disconnect from society, and also fear and suspicion as a consequence of that. So I thought I would end with reading a couple of vignettes from interviews with people we have talked to. This is from an interview with a person who worked with immigrant women. And this was something that we hadn't thought about before. So this is just sort of an example of things that sort of pop up in these interviews that we hadn't thought about before as sort of relevant to think about justice. It's the practical things. If you can't take the bus because they don't take cash, you need to walk everywhere to get some special baby food or whatever. You need to pack up the kids and walk across town. And then you don't have time to do the laundry, because you can only book the laundry room for a couple of hours, and you spend all that time walking to the stores and back. It's because they can't afford the phone, and they can't get the apps because the phone has no internet, and they don't have those 4 last digits, so they can't get a bank ID. It's all connected, and practically it just doesn't work. You can only be at one place at a time. And this was something that we hadn't thought about, is if you can't do things online, and if you can't sort of pay digitally wherever you are, everything takes so much more time. So they live in linear time in a much more sort of obvious way from most of us, because we are always constantly doing many things at the same time. They can't do that. They need to do one thing at a time. And if you can only buy the things you need in one store and you need to walk to that store, then there are so many other things that you cannot do. So this was sort of one aspect of how economic exclusion through digitization creates problems and difficulties in the everyday life of vulnerable people that just don't have time to get things done. Here is an example. I'll do 2 more. So this is an example of the suspicion that is created in the minds of many people who live in these kinds of marginalized existence. If digitization just continues, that's a dark future. It's because Sweden wants to show the world that we do digitization better than other countries, that we don't need cash money. Well, you can use people that way, those who don't have as much knowledge as others. They don't think about that. They only think about showing the world so others look up to our fine technology. That's where the discrimination comes in. There are many kinds of technology they could show if they want to do that. They don't need to take the cash away. People should be able to choose how to pay. Those who can't keep up, it's like throwing them in a grave. That's what I think. They throw away the little people in a grave so they can't get up. They don't care about that. But the little people who suffer because they don't have the knowledge or can't learn it, no one cares about them. Why take that bit away, that people can choose how to pay? Why is that choice not important? So sort of one aspect of how we think about individual choice and the freedom to choose as a central and crucial aspect of what it is to live a free life in modern society. But what counts as a meaningful choice will be very different depending on what circumstances you live under. And if you live under these circumstances where you are dependent on cash money, and that is sort of the crucial choice in order for you to get by on a day-to-day basis, and they take that choice away, and you are sort of given to understand that this is not a choice which is considered to be by official society an important one, but it is the crucial one for you. This is sort of another example of how the experiences of living these marginalized existences completely changes the aspect of what is a meaningful or important choice and what isn't. And here's the last one. And this is from an elderly woman who sells a street magazine in order to get by. And she's almost 80, and this is how she survives. It's a problem for many people, the cashlessness. The rough sleepers, homeless, old people, they don't want to bother with the technology. If they want to go for a coffee, they can't because the store is cash free. I found a nice shirt in that store over there, but no, the store is cash free. Wherever you go, it's cash free. If cash disappeared, it would be very difficult for me to sell anything. Many of my regulars, they have only cash too. Who thinks about them? Money runs things, I think. It runs us. If you don't have a computer, no Swish, no ID, you're done for. You get dependent. If I need help to get something, I have to give my card and code to the person helping me. Or maybe they write the code down. I don't know what they do with it. It's like when people stand over me when I'm in my wheelchair and they say, does she have money? Like I'm stupid or something. Looking down on people. You lose your integrity, your faith in society. But I lost that a long time ago. So there's also sort of a clue to the experience and what it's like to live in economic marginalization. It's not only the practical difficulties, so whether you can pay or not, but also that if you need help, if you are disabled, which many of these people are in various ways, and they are dependent on help from others. If you need other people to go and do your shopping, for instance, you can't just give them a banknote to go and do their shopping. You need to give them either, if you have a bank card, you need to give them your bank card and your code. So you make yourself vulnerable to other people in a way, which is more exposing to them, also make them much more dependent upon other people. And this was something that also sort of came up again and again, is the humiliation of being dependent upon other people's goodwill. One way of sort of negotiating the situation, for instance, some of the people we interviewed sleep in cars because they're homeless, but they can't pay for parking. So there are sort of people in Malmö who sort of sell parking tickets to homeless people so that they can pay, so that they can park the cars without getting tickets. So they are also dependent upon them, and they charge more for parking than you would have to pay if you could buy your ticket yourself. So it's that kind of sort of constant dependence upon the goodwill of other people. So even if you do have, so this is sort of the crucial point, and this is on this note I will end, is that if we want to understand what living in economic hardship means for people who are on the very margins of society, we need to start with their experiences. And we can start with their experiences if we don't know what they are. So learning from them as a way of also some kind of philosophical conversation about the experiences of what the problems are that they are facing, counts, I think, as crucial philosophical input into how we need to think about economic injustice in our world. And if we don't do that, then the risk is that we also, as normative political theorists, conduct economic and epistemic injustice against the people whose interests we claim to philosophize about. And final word, I have no idea still if I'm doing this right. This is sort of seems very exploratory to me. It is very difficult. And I'm constantly thinking about if I'm just justifying my intervention to these people's lives by sort of the virtuous feeling that I get from, you know, doing philosophy in a different kind of way. That is a constant concern for me. But it feels important. And I think it also is a discussion that would be interesting and important to have among philosophers in how we engage not only with other disciplines, but also with the people whose interests, rights, and well-being we try to understand. That's it.